Hello and welcome to my project for Poly 314. My name is John Papayuanu and I'll be doing a solo project for this class. I chose to talk about today the Environmental Protection Review Agency. It's an administrative organization, and it's a group of expert adjudicators that conduct reviews of compliance orders and administrative monetary penalties, or otherwise known as AMPs. They have the authority to issue a compliance order, to prevent violations from occurring, to stop ongoing violations, and to require violations to be corrected. The review officer team is composed of 3 people, the chief review officer and 2 review officers. Their authority and jurisdiction comes from the following acts: the Antarctic Environmental Protection Act, the Canadian Wildlife Act, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the 1999 International Rivers Improvement Act, the Migratory Birds Convention Act, and finally the 1994 Enforcement Officers Act. In addition, review officers have the authority to confirm or cancel a compliance order, which can be appealed at the federal court level. They can also determine whether a person has indeed committed a violation and whether or not the penalty that they have to pay is an adequate amount in relation to the violation. This decision cannot be appealed and is final. In the following section, we will be discussing AMPs and compliance orders and the guidelines to contesting them. AMPs and compliance orders may be issued under the acts previously mentioned, in addition to a few extra ones. Contesting a compliance order or an AMP have a very similar guideline. To contest a compliance order or an administrative monetary penalty, the applicant must write a written report which he or she then signs and sends to the EPRC. Only the chief review officer has the power to grant an extension if the 30 days have passed. Once the EPRC has received a notice and reviewed the file of the applicant, a pre-hearing is established, in which case both parties come together, talk about issues, to have certain clarifications, and try to ultimately come to an agreement before the hearing occurs. They also try to establish a timetable for the hearing. In some cases, a mediator can be prescribed to the case, in which he tries to get both parties to come to some sort of agreement. However, this doesn't always happen, and so the hearing gets set forth. At the hearing, the applicant has the right to be served in whatever language he chooses. The location is usually near his residence area. And lastly, he has the right to appear before the review officer and have his decision heard. Next, we will be looking at some of the EPRC's decisions in relation to enforcement and compliance orders. The first case that we will be examining happened on May 2nd, 2013, and a decision was rendered by the chief review officer in relation to enforcement orders at the time. It was given against the Atlantic Industrial Service Company. They had been exporting a product for about 8 years and were finally apprehended by a team of inspectors because the EPRC started doing blitzes on companies that were exporting products to make sure that they were safe and that they fit all the requirements. They found out that the product that they were selling did not have the proper requirements to be exported or the permit, so they stopped them from selling it, exporting it to the States. The company argued that the product had been made from recyclable materials, and because of that, it did not meet it was exempted from meeting the requirements that other products would meet. In addition, the fact that it was being sent to the USA and that the USA had no problem with it meant that it was out of the jurisdiction of the officers. Lastly, the product itself, they argued, was not hazardous chemicals, nor was it hazardous recyclable materials, and was not going to be dumped anywhere. It was being used as consumption for fuel. Thus, with all of this information, the chief review officer came to the conclusion that they should be allowed to continue to export the products, and canceled the enforcement issue order. Next, we will be looking at a second example. This is a case regarding a compliance order. On February 9th, 2010, an environmental protection compliance order was issued to Enviro West Inc. Corporation. They possessed oil that had been contaminated, and they had been issued to destroy the fuel at the Walls Hill Treatment Center. They had to do so by April 30th, 2010. This case occurred on February the 9th, 2010, and the facility was the only one available in the region that could do this task, and it had been closed until after April 30th, 2010. So they requested that their compliance order be extended, and it rightfully so was, and they were given until July 2nd, 2010 to destroy the fuel. So this is an example of where a compliance order was handed out, and it was established at the pre-hearing that they needed an extension with a good reason for the facility being closed. Finally, we will be looking at some policy suggestions or changes that the EPRC should consider. As the environment becomes a more prominent issue in today's society, and so does its protection and regulation, it becomes apparent that society needs to do more to protect it. Thus, we suggest that the EPRC should increase in its size as an agency. So far, it has one chief review officer and 2 review officers. We suggest that there should be at least 2 chief review officers and a bigger team, at least from 5 to 7 review officers. One positive about this is that the administrative agency can expand in its scope and responsibilities. It could have more jurisdiction. It could watch over more issues than only with its few members that it has currently. This could also help make more wise choices and better decisions when compared to previous cases where, like for example, in the U.S. case where they were exporting the permit, they were exporting the item. Had they had a bigger team and were able to assess the situation better, there would not have been a need for them to intervene and take away their rights to export a product that was perfectly legal. One bad thing about this policy change would be also that they would be it would be a bigger agency, and this might lead to slower action and slower decisions, and the company might take them more time to come up with resolutions, and that could ultimately lead to more environmental damage if action isn't taken quickly. To conclude, the EPRC is an administrative review agency that looks at how companies and individuals comply with the rules and regulations that are set out in law, and they attempt to find resolutions and sometimes issue orders of compliance and monetary penalties when a violation has occurred. It is an important administrative agency because they help to keep the environment clean, and their importance is great for their future generations, and they should be expanding the roles and their prevalence in the field of environment.